Absolutely. Let's keep going down that road. It's no surprise, when you look at the origins of education systems, especially in relation to Indigenous people in our country, that you see the outcomes that you're seeing, right? Schools and
Hmm.
educational systems were designed to continue to erase and suppress and oppress entire communities. Can you talk about, a little bit about the history of Indigenous peoples in relations to school systems, as well as what do you see happening now? Like, what's giving you energy and what's giving you hope for the Indigenous education movement?
Absolutely. This is kind of where I become a little inspired. But if we think about the original origins of education as we know it today, and its compulsory imposition on our people, it all began in 1868 under the direction of a war general by the name of Richard Henry Pratt. And we all know the coined term "kill the Indian, save the man." Those sentiments carried and evolved through different sorts of systems that impose their way through our state and across our state. The boarding school is where a lot of our elders tell us where the sacred hoop of our nation broke. It's where that lack of inherent sense of community was challenged, and really when we start thinking about how it was imposed on the people and how it persisted from 1868 until 1928 when a gentleman by the name of Lewis Merriam conducted a study called the Merriam Report. And sorry if this is a repeat for a lot of folks, but I think there is a larger population that has never heard it. But in 1828 or 1928, excuse me, Lewis Merriam and some scholars conducted some studies in the boarding school system and found them to be grossly and unjustly unfit for students, right? So they thought this mechanism of education used to assimilate indigenous people into society, right, and basically committed heinous and atrocious crimes to our people, in which we're still trying to basically rise up from today, is the very same system that persists. So, despite all of the urgings in the Merriam Report to switch up some things, give control back to Indigenous peoples, we're still not seeing that. We're still seeing education systems that are wrought with federal mandates, with mandates from people who have no direct experience into the authentic lives of our communities. And so it's just a perpetuation of a broken cycle. And then you fast forward into the 1970s era, where they thought, okay, maybe the government doesn't quite have all of the answers, or we can't really do entire control. So maybe we'll give some more control to Indigenous peoples. The BIE, BIA systems have a little bit more flexibility, but not much when it comes to the ultimate say in what happens in the schools because of everything. And so I think what we're seeing today is we have a ton of practitioners in the field who are doing amazing work. I really want to reiterate the fact that SB 68 is not an attack on teachers and practitioners in the current systems, because they're doing it passionately, fervently, advocating in the best way that they can within the system that was they were designed to work in, right? But SB 68 really gives us an opportunity to start exercising cultural sovereignty when it comes to teaching. I have many family relatives who are teachers and in the field, and I think one of the biggest stifles to their innovation and creativity and passion is all of those multi-layered state, federal mandates that come down on them, and really, limits what they can do. They feel they have the freedom to do within those spaces. So I think the biggest advantage that we have today versus maybe a couple generations ago is that sense of cultural safety that we have. We think about our parents who are just impacted with the 1978 Religious Freedom Act, right. All of our ceremonies and stuff were done underground. Now they finally have that sense of liberation, and our generation was born into a space where we were able to freely exercise that to a degree that was not seen in a long time. And so I think the advocacy looks different now because we have that sense of safety and not fear for the implications that come as a result of exercising that liberation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for talking about that, the history, and for getting the background and how these systems were built, and the intention of them, and why it's not surprising that they're functioning the way they're functioning. Kind of turning back a little bit to the actual legislation itself. We had, Senator Heinert had touched a little bit already on opposition to the bill. What are you all seeing? What is the biggest opposition? Like, what are people saying about why they don't support this legislation?
That's a great question. Opponents to the bill will primarily challenge the funding aspect of the bill. They believe that the legislation is a direct threat to the school districts. Now, if we look at the way public funding is generated, it's generated in a way so that it's not necessarily designed for the school, but to follow the student. Taxpayer dollars go into that formula, and all of these things that our families contribute to society should be considered into that equation. I know that not last week, sorry, it felt like a week ago, but yesterday, opponents mentioned that they had questions around the fact that the schools, because they would be designed in partnership with a local nonprofit, would not only rely solely on the public school dollars to support the school, but they would also work in direct collaboration with a foundation or their 501c3 or their nonprofit. Opponents yesterday questioned that and the ability to be able to do that. But I will tell you that most large school districts, including the two largest in our state, which is Rapid City and Sioux Falls, both have public school foundations that enable them to receive private and nonprofit philanthropy dollars that then they can use to maximize their programs and services. So it would be similar to what we see in those spaces. We also hear a lot of opponents say that, well, why do we need a bill? Because we can already do this. However, many of the people on our coalition who have years of experience in the school system will tell you that there is a huge and stark difference between will and authority. Technically speaking, school districts had the ability to do this, to replicate something of this nature for generations. As Senator Heinert said yesterday in his testimony, that we had about roughly 60, if not 100 years to start creating systems that were responsive to the needs of our students, and it hasn't been done. He also reinforced it by stating that nothing has been done, no solutions have been offered until last year's SB 66 was brought to the floor of the state legislature. I think that the primary difference between what they're proposing, yesterday, one of the opponent's solutions was that they would create a magnet school. And I think that's an amazing idea. I would highly encourage any South Dakota public school district with a large Indigenous student population, or even with a small Indigenous student population, because Indigenous representation is such a huge and integral part of South Dakota, to create such a magnet school. But I don't think that it should be either or. I think it should be both. I think public schools have a due diligence and responsibility to their Indigenous students. But this mechanism basically gives space for authentically designed schools to emerge, right? Because if you have a magnet school within a system that has consistently and perpetually failed an entire demographic, replicating a magnet school with that will be a challenge. SB 68 enables locals to have the ultimate innovative, creative, and authority over that school. And then it creates the safety and buy-in that's necessary for stakeholders in the community to join forces with that as well. And that's not something that we're seeing in current systems.
All right, and for those of you who are just tuning in, we are about halfway through the show. We're sitting here with Sarah Pierce, talking about community-based schools and SB 68. If you're watching, you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and write down your questions, send them over to Sicangu CDC. You can also comment right there on the live, and we'll get those answered for you. Sarah, can you talk just a little bit about why SB 66 did not pass, and why are you more optimistic about SB 68 passing?
Absolutely, that's a great question. Last year, one thing to keep in mind, and I would really like to highlight this fact, is that SB 66 and SB 68 now were fully supported by all 9 tribes of the Oceti Sakowin. It was supported by the South Dakota State Tribal Relations Committee, the Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association. Last year, it passed unanimously through the South Dakota Senate, and then died at the House Education Committee after the oppositional testimony by members of the Oglala Lakota County School District offered testimony. So, in my opinion, to the members of the legislature who were comprised that committee, it appeared to them that this bill wasn't homogeneously consented. So I feel like that added a layer of conflict for them, and then it just died there. I think one unique challenge that came as a result of their opposition was the fact that the Oglala Sioux tribe offered a resolution of support. So that told us, and should have told the state, that the people of the Oglala Lakota Nation supported SB 66. But to the state, it was perceived that because the state entity that came out in opposition, that the people were not in consensus. That added a layer of sovereignty suppression that is super tangential, but it's an important factor when we think about stateside politics and how that sovereignty suppression of a state-funded entity residing on sovereign tribal lands poses a threat, especially to the perception of people who aren't directly familiar with tribal sovereignty and all the implications that goes along there. This year, we were very intentional. We had President Killer came at the encouragement of the OST Council to further support the fact that the Oglala Sioux tribe did in fact support this bill, and they continue to do so. So that's one aspect of that. And the primary concern from the district was funding. And I think there was just a lot of misconceptions around what exactly the bill was. But I also like to reinforce the fact that these schools are significantly smaller in nature. So a community-based school doesn't open at full capacity. In fact, it opens microscopically with one classroom at a time. As you see with most of our most successful immersion school models that are in operation currently, it starts with one classroom and then gradually expands to include a class until the optimal grade level range is achieved. And so in most community-based schools, it caps enrollment at about 150 to 200 students maximum. We see a lot more students transfer within systems during a normal year than we would with the gradual release or transfer of them to a community-based school.
Thank you for the insight. That's helpful. Again, clarifying that sometimes the just the like details of how funding and school systems even work is very confusing for the average person, myself included. So this is really helpful background. Can you talk a little bit about, okay, let's say this thing passes, and community-based schools are able to move forward. What do you see the long-term positive effects being? Obviously for Indigenous communities, but also for South Dakota as a state at large. How do you see this supporting really the broader community at play here?
I think first and foremost, we'll see, like, the pie in the sky dream is to create a model that could be replicable within existing systems, right? That we will see these emerge as a result of the positive success. In addition to creating this successful ideal model, you would have all of these byproducts of that, right? So an increased economy, more jobs offered, not only tribally based jobs, but statewide jobs as well. And then you would see an increased sense of identity, an increased sense of cultural pride and confidence in who students are and what they're doing and how they're contributing to the citizenry of their tribal communities, but the state at large. One thing that we always talk about at the coalition level is the fact that Indigenous education in South Dakota is really ground zero for education and what we argue in America, because Indigenous students in South Dakota, when we think about lifelong residents of our state, Indigenous people are the least mobile. And it goes back to that inherent connection to land. But when we layer that with things such as the dropout rate, there's limitations on what you can do if you don't finish high school, especially in today's very capitalistically driven society. So I think being able to see a lot more mobility, not for good, but just so seeing students graduate and leave and then come back. Because I remember growing up, elders would say the goal is for you guys to, graduate from high school, leave the reservation, learn the ways of the world beyond what's working efficiently, to come home in contribution and in service to the people. And so I think that's the really big dream, where we're seeing students with confidence understand what their skill set is, what their God-given or creator-given talents are, go out and perfect those talents, maximize them, and then bring them back for the good of the community. And that would be an amazing dream.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I've heard that many times, where it's been said to go learn the white man's way to come back and help your people. And I think that really ties into what you've talked about a lot throughout today's show, is identity. And why do you think that can make such a difference for just people in general in their everyday lives, just knowing who they are, knowing their culture? It seems it has definitely made a difference for you, because I can hear the passion and everything you talk about. I feel like we could throw any question at you and you just take off with it. So what do you think that does for whenever you know who you are, you know where you come from, and with this bill, people will be able to learn that in their everyday lives? As far as kids, they'll be able to learn that. How does that make a difference?
I think it makes 100% all of the difference. If I were to go back to my personal story, I think being able to be unapologetic in every aspect of self is the most crucial thing, and it's the most indicative of healing, right? It's not something that we can learn through a textbook or an experience. My personal story is I call myself a professional hoop jumper, because I was able to just navigate through systems by jumping through hoops of expectations, right? So then I think the biggest takeaway, and I love the fact that you said learn the ways of the white men, because that's exactly how it was framed. But I think especially places like Indian Collective are showing us that you can navigate through a system, and the ways of the white men aren't exactly the ways that we have to take. I mean, we do have a broad range of skill set and authentic knowledge and genius that we can use in mainstream society, that we've been, I don't know, for whatever reason, stifled from doing. But we're seeing an increase and a resurgence of that indigenous genius being created elsewhere. So I think the biggest takeaway for me, and not to make this super personal, but having gone through all the hoops, through all these different systems, and then landing back into the very same system as an advocate. I was in the public school system for 8 years as a professional before starting my liberation journey outside and being an advocate outside of a system. I think the biggest takeaway I have is being able to really find yourself in the world, but finding yourself in that work, and being able to, part of being unapologetic is also reclaiming space that we're not taking up, that we have an inherent right to have and hold. And there's no one way or right way to do things, that we have a unique way that we carry ourselves in the world and contribute to the greater good. And I think that's where the heart of SB 68 comes in. It's like, let us show our genius in terms of our students' education, and show how it can flourish.
For anyone who's watching, be they student, parent, family member, somebody who's interested in helping with this process, or participating in this process, what are the ways that you are encouraging and asking people to participate as this legislation has moved forward?
I think what I would echo Senator Heinert's previously stated sentiments, that it would be extremely important for community members in this. And I want to reiterate the fact that SB 68 is not an Indigenous specific bill, that it is all encompassing. It affects every single South Dakotan. It's very inclusive. So having proponents of the bill reach out to your local representatives and members of the Senate, and tell them how important this is to you. Tell them how important it is to see these opportunities come to light. And then reinforce to your school districts. I guess one shout out that I would really love to make is that Todd County School District, on a couple nights ago, we had a session. Todd County Public School District is the first and only, at this time, public school district in South Dakota that endorses SB 68, SB 68. And that's so unprecedented. But board members said, you know, we're doing as best we can within the systems that we have, but we do feel that we're falling short in language and culture. And if this creates an opportunity for an entity to demonstrate effectiveness and it's something that we could replicate, this is something, I mean, it's a win-win for us. And so they saw beyond it. I was impressed with the fact that the thought was about the kids first. We don't see that a lot, especially in the field of education. Unfortunately, it's all about dollars and capitalistic views of things. But this was an opportunity where the Todd County school board members took that courageous step in service of students.
Well, awesome. We're coming to the end of the show. I do want to share very quickly just some comments that everybody is posting. You have a lot of support. I love it, Sarah, because you and Senator Troy were here today. I think it has definitely motivated a lot of people to want to actually reach out to their senators and actually take part in all of this. So thank you so much for being here today. We have April Martinez. She says, "Go, Sarah." We have Trisha. She says, "Yes, go, Sarah, go." She says, "You are very fierce," and she has a fire emoji. We also have Misty, who says, "Troy and Sarah are such articulate and knowledgeable champions of Indigenous education and our right to provide authentic, responsive learning experiences for our students." She has such appreciation for both of you and those that work with all of you. We also have Madonna, who says, "How can parents become more involved from the ground up with the South Dakota Ed Coalition?" So that would be actually a question that you could answer, Sarah.
Yes, that would be amazing. I think one of the first steps is to, we have a website, sdeducationequity.org, or we have our Facebook page that also links to the website. There's membership forms and there's multi-levels of membership that people can feel free to engage with at this time. And then we start having meetings, and that's where we have subgroup. So we have one monthly coalition convening in which we just give updates on all the subgroups. Since we have 5 key priority areas, each of those priority area groups meet in between each monthly convening. And so they're tasked with whatever that group determines to be an agenda item or like action item for the group. And then they report back at the convenings. But the subgroups are where a lot of the action happens. And that's where I would encourage parents to start, wherever they feel most passionate in serving or learning more about. That would be a great place to start.
Well, awesome. We just want to give you a moment. Is there anything else that you feel you need to get the message out to anybody who's watching? Anything else important that you feel you want to share at this time?
110%. I think Senator Heinert mentions in testimony all the time, and he mentioned before he had to leave the call that if creating this type of opportunity could be done in the system, it would have already been done. It would have been done years ago. I think that this is if it was a mere matter of parental advocacy, collaborative thinking, collaborative constructive conversations, we would have had that predecessors ago. This is something, SB 68 is something that enables our communities to finally define what education looks like for our kids and be able to carry that and do it in the ways that we know how.
Awesome. Well, Mike, do you have any last questions that you want to ask Sarah?
No, that's it for me. I just wanted to, again, thank you for taking time to come and talk to us and share, like I said before, I think sometimes legislative process and educational processes can be very mysterious and hard to know what's going on. So it's great to have you and Senator Heinert take the time to demystify a little bit what's going on and what's being talked about, as well as to really just help people understand how they can participate if this is something that they want for their child or family member or just for their community at whole. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm excited to see what else, actually go check out the site myself and see what the other priorities you all have developed are. And yeah, thank you again for taking the time.
No, thank you so much. And I just want to thank the entire team of the South Dakota Education Equity Coalition members and the hard work that they've done, because as Senator Heinert and I both agree that it's a team effort and we have a great team. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We'll talk to you soon.